सिम्टम्स जारी रहते हैं तो हो सकता है आपको रिपीट पीसीआर की जरूरत पड़े या सीटी स्कैन करके कंफर्म करना पड़ेगा आपको कोविड है कि नहीं है। घर पे ऐसे जिनको भी सिम्टम्स, एनीबडी हु रिपोर्ट्स फीवर, बॉडी पेन, लॉस ऑफ स्मेल, लॉस ऑफ टेस्ट, any cough, respiratory complaints, you should isolate them immediately. Any contact, open contact without your mask for more than half an hour puts your contact at risk of acquiring that infection. So you recognize the symptom. As soon as you recognize, ensure that the person is separated, isolated in a separate room with an ensuite bathroom. Okay, that is isolation of somebody who has the infection or who has COVID-like symptoms even before you diagnose it. The second thing is quarantine. जो contact family में रहता है, they are the highest risk. So family should always be quarantined for
consultation कर रही है.
Even if you have a negative PCR, समझो आपने फैमिली के सबको टेस्ट कर दिया, कोई घर पे पॉजिटिव आ गया, उनका टेस्ट नेगेटिव होने के बावजूद भी आपको वो पूरा फैमिली क्वारंटाइन रहना जरूरी है, बिकॉज it is important that it remains asymptomatic, so it's important that you quarantine, separate them from the rest of the crowd, because most people may not report symptoms. So the family of a positive patient or a COVID suspect should ensure that they complete their quarantine period. So the first thing was isolation and quarantine. The second thing is, what do I do if somebody in my house is positive? We have recognized the symptoms, and now if we have tested positive, or say we are waiting test, how do we manage such patient? Unka kya monitoring hona chahiye? Most important, isolation. Secondly, उनका ऑक्सीजन का मॉनिटरिंग, हर 4 घंटे में जो भी कोविड के पेशेंट्स हैं उनका ऑक्सीजन का लेवल चेक करना है. एवरी टाइम यू शुड मेक देम वॉक फॉर 6 minutes, so that even if there is a drop in after walking, that is a suggestion that they might require oxygen. That means they need hospital. So these are the two important things that you look for when somebody is being managed at home. They should be separated in a separate room. Only one dedicated caregiver who ensures that every time they come in contact with the person, wears a mask and wears gloves, washes their hands between any contact. And there should be a reliable caregiver who can coordinate between the patient as well as a doctor, so that you recognize symptoms that need hospitalization. What are the symptoms that you are worried about when your patient is being managed at home? The most important thing is, it is a self-limiting viral illness. So any viral illness क्या होता है, 5 से 6 दिन मैक्स बुखार होता है, बॉडी पेन होता है, थ्रोट इरिटेशन होता है, थोड़ा सा खांसी होता है, and then they get better. So if they don't get better, even beyond 5 days, 6 days, if the fever is ongoing, if the body pain weakness is severe, it's important that you inform your doctor, so that these are the patients who are likely to progress. When we say likely to progress, that means simple viral infection say it can progress to pneumonia, and that pneumonia happens usually by 5th, 6th day and up to end of 2nd week. That is the most crucial period, and not everybody gets pneumonia. Don't be worried about the things that you hear. There are certain people who are at higher risk. So people who have obesity, people who are inactive, people who are smokers, people who have diseases like diabetes, BP, heart disease. And we've also noticed that some young people can get pneumonia, and that's possibly there is a genetic link to progression to pneumonia. So it's important that more than these risk factors, you monitor symptoms. So अगर कोई बोलता है मुझे extreme weakness है, खड़े नहीं रहने को हो रहा है, खांसी बढ़ रही है, बातें करते भी दम जैसा महसूस होता है, या ऑक्सीजन का लेवल कम होता है, these are the risk factors. या बुखार more than 24 hours of fever going on very high, again is a risk of progressing to severe disease. So this is a way you take care of your patient at home. Liaise with a doctor, get certain tests done, because these tests will also predict progression of the disease. Lot of times in this way, at least we are managing patients at home. That means CT becomes an additional information tool for the doctors. But don't panic about a CT report, because a CT is always interpreted along with the clinical condition. So the scores may not mean much if you are all right, but the scores, even if it is not much, will mean a lot to a doctor if you still have symptoms of fever, body pain, or worsening cough. So that is the most important thing, how you monitor your patient at home. The second is, how do you manage your household contact? As I told you, elderly people, diabetic people, obese people are at risk of getting severe disease. Ensure that your susceptible people at home are completely kept away from the patient. They should not be the caregiver for such patients. Also, now TMC recommends that everybody who has a COVID at home, the family should be tested. But even if your test is negative, अगर आप family में है, आप COVID के contact है, आपका test negative है, that doesn't mean कि आप vigilant नहीं रहे. आपको oxygen monitor करना ही है, and you should be vigilant for symptoms. और जब भी symptoms आते हैं, then you should get yourself retested. A single negative PCR in somebody who's a contact will not mean that you may not develop a disease. That means that at that stage you don't have disease, but may get it later. So please monitor yourself and please quarantine yourself. You have a responsibility towards a community. So any family contact should stay away from rest of the people for at least 2 weeks from your last contact. That is a social responsibility that we all have to follow. So that's how we take care of household people. That's how we take care of patients who are at home. That's how we recognize people who are likely to require hospital. And based in communication with your doctor, you should get such patients who need hospitalization in the hospital. Remember that everything short of oxygen can be managed at home. But if you require oxygen, we need a hospital. And managing oxygen therapy at home is not going to be easy. So don't think that, we'll arrange oxygen at home and let's manage at home. People are scared these days to go to hospitals and they feel that they can manage at home. But everything cannot be managed at home. So recognize early who are likely to require oxygen. And from there, you can let the hospital take over the management of your patient. So these are certain basic things about how you manage your patient and what you need to do when you have COVID at home. Now I hand over the session to Dr. Bhave, who is going to speak about certain myths. And these are important because, we all get a lot of WhatsApp chats about 100 things about COVID, and sometimes it's so difficult to convince our patients otherwise. So I hand it over to Dr. Bhave.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Preeti. As Dr. Preeti mentioned, this the most active university nowadays is WhatsApp University, and it is giving us so many messages which are very difficult to interpret and to judge whether they are true or false. Now, this disease has come so suddenly all over the world that people are trying all sorts of methods to try to treat it. So all sorts of different treatments are promoted, but there is no proof that most of them actually have any benefit or not. For example, taking hot steam 3-4 times a day, or drinking hot water, or all sorts of herbal remedies, all that, none of them is any guarantee not get COVID. So you cannot really overindulge in all these things. Then, as Dr. Preeti said, that 80% of the patients, they get well on their own, like a viral illness. So whatever medicine they take, they are going to get well. Even if they don't take any medicine, they are going to get well. So often it happens that people come to believe that इस medicine से ठीक हो गया, उस medicine से ठीक हो गया. But what we need is, if there is a medicine which can guarantee that if you take it, when you get COVID, you will not become serious. ऐसी कोई 100% दवा अभी तक नहीं है. So even many doctors or a lot of patients believe that taking some herbal medicines, or for that matter, taking antibiotics, like people are taking doxycycline, azithromycin on their own, and many other medicines, hoping that it will do good to them. So as it is, many people don't require hospitalization, they get well. So the credit goes to all these medicines. But remember that they are not of much use in preventing that particular patient from becoming serious later. So another issue is that people look at their RT-PCR report, and nowadays everybody is asking for the CT value of the report, that is the cycle threshold value. It is mentioned in the report that it is positive and CT value is 20 or 25 or 16. So looking at that CT value, people get scared. If the CT value is low, that is below 20, for example, then they get worried that I'm going to get severe COVID. And if the CT value is high, like 25, 30, 32, then they feel, okay, then my CT value is high, so I will not get serious COVID. So this is actually a myth. You may have any CT value in your RT report, and that does not decide whether you are going to become serious or not. So don't give so much importance to that. Next is, as Dr. Preeti mentioned, that people are running to get a CT scan of the chest or HRCT of the chest. As she pointed out, a CT scan, you develop a pneumonia. Basically, a person develops a pneumonia in COVID only after 5 or 6 days and any time during the second week after getting ill. So within the first 3, 4, 5 days, it is very unlikely that your scan will show anything. So many times we see that the person gets fever, and even before doing a RT-PCR test, they do a CT scan of the chest, and they come with the CT scan, happy that it is not showing anything. So I must not be having COVID. That is not correct. It is very important to note down on which day you notice the first complaint. That it may be fever, it may be weakness, it may be body pain or cough. So on the first day, you note down the date. And ideally, if you are going to do a CT scan, it should be with advice of the doctor. It should be after 5 or 6 days. And then only it will show something. Then the CT score. Now, the CT score is a sort of a scoring system which was devised by some radiologists to give an idea that how much percent of your lung is infected or affected. But there are a lot of fallacies to it. It is not that if your CT scan is score is very low, say 2, 3 out of 25, then you are very safe. It is not right to say that. Supposing you do the CT scan on the third or fourth day and your score is 3 out of 25, you are still early in the disease. You are still another week or 10 days to go, during which that score may increase and the pneumonia may increase. So person with a low CT score should not relax. The CT scan has more features to it. Are the shadows early shadows, or is the person showing healing shadows? So that only the radiologist will be able to give us the interpretation. And always the patient's condition is most useful, whether that patient is becoming serious or not. As Dr. Preeti said, continuing high fever, extreme weakness, patient is getting increasing cough, feeling breathless, then even if the CT scan show a low score, one cannot relax. That person is possibly heading for a pneumonia in a few days' time. So don't do a CT scan by yourself too early, and don't be too dependent on that scoring system. Okay, just as CT scan alone is not a guide to decide whether the person is serious or not, the report is also not a total guide. Nowadays, everybody is familiar over last 1 year, and everybody knows the list of tests that COVID patients are asked to do. So again, we see this spectacle of people doing a full battery of tests, including CRP, ferritin, D-dimer, CKMB, ProPi, and your interleukin 6, and coming with that report and the CT scan. And then getting worried if one of the reports is little high or little low. So the reports are a guide, especially when you want to read that every third day or fourth day, as the doctor decides for you. And they are only a guide. The main thing to know is, how is the patient? Are you getting fever every day? Is it high fever? Are you feeling weaker and weaker? You're losing appetite? And are you developing increasing cough or breathlessness? That is more important than any report. So if the report is normal, CT scan score is low, but patient is not all right, running fever every day for 3, 4 days, I am still worried. Just the report reassure. And the other side also we see that reports may be abnormal. The D-dimer is high for a long time. The CRP is not coming down. Patient is absolutely all right. 14 days have passed and there are no complaints, but patient is scared because the report is not coming normal. So don't be too dependent on the report, and try not to read, or interpret your own condition by using Google searches. It is going to frighten you more than it is going to guide you. Then the next thing is that the PCR test again to see whether you have come negative or not. Many companies are also telling their employees that you can join back only after the PCR has come negative if you have suffered from COVID. What is happening is that, yes, most people, when they recover, the RT-PCR does come negative. But there are some people who are fully all right, they have completely recovered. But when you test them, even after 14 days, the PCR is still positive. You repeat the test after 7 days, again it is positive. This can happen. And that is because the test it detects certain parts of the virus, and even the dead virus or fragments of the virus, they may be there in the throat or in the nose, and the test will detect that. So now we have stopped asking for repeat RT-PCR test as a proof that you are cured. We can decide whether you are cured or not by many other ways. First of all, most important, by clinical examination and by some other tests. And we do not repeat the RT-PCR to decide if you are cured or not. On the other hand, if the patient is showing signs of COVID, but the PCR is coming negative, again, that does not rule out COVID, because almost 25% to 30% of patients on the first test, they may not show positive RT-PCR. It has so many variables, like how the sample is taken, is the entire throat checked properly or the nose checked properly, and how much virus is there in the throat, is it detectable or not. So it may come negative, but if we suspect COVID, we should not let down our guard. We may start the treatment anyway. We may do a CT scan that may show evidence of pneumonia, and we do treat COVID. And we may repeat the test that may come positive. So you can have COVID even if your RT-PCR is negative, and it's the symptom. So again and again we say, how you feel, how the patient is doing, that is most important. We don't rule out COVID even if RT-PCR is negative, if the patient has the suggestive symptoms. Another issue is this, that as Dr. Preeti said again, that people are not sort of happy. No one is happy to get admitted, and they want to stay home, be managed at home. So sometimes people may actually say that I'm not breathless, I'm feeling okay, I'm fine. So you have to be objective about this. You may be feeling all right, but your pulse oximeter reading is dropping. If it is going below 94 when it was previously 98, that is a warning sign. You may be showing normal pulse oximeter reading when you are sitting, but when you walk for 6 minutes, and then your oximeter level shows below 94, then that is an objective evidence that you may be developing a chest infection or pneumonia stage. So just being exhausted and having a low pulse oximetry reading after walking is enough indication that we may advise you to get admitted, because if you do need oxygen, you need a hospital, and then you should not resist that. You must get hospitalized at the right time, because sometimes we see patients who are staying at home for too long and then rushing to hospital when they're very, very late. That also is not a good thing to do. On the hand, some people are very, very scared, which is natural. But when they are too scared, they will say that I'm feeling breathless, because of anxiety. And their pulse rate may go up. And so that subjective feeling of breathlessness is there, but oxygen levels are fine. In that case, again, it is a difficult job for the doctor to decide whether you really need hospital or not. And we may ask for an X-ray or a CT scan to really decide if this breathlessness requires hospitalization or not. So these are some of the confusing points that we see day to day in our work. And that is why we needed to clear that up. And from here, we could go on to take the questions which you have already submitted to us.
Sure, Doctor. So, Doctor, first we'll go on with the questions that were pre-recorded with us. Additionally, if anyone has any questions in the chat box, then we would go to admit those, sir. So the first, I'll combine the first two questions. The question goes as, does COVID... does COVID happens only through your nostrils or through your mouth? And can the same be prevented by drinking hot water or by doing steaming or by doing any exercise?
Should I take the answer?
Requesting
Sorry, doctor.
everyone, apart from doctor, everybody should be on mute mode.
Okay. Yeah. So the
Sorry
question
for
was.
yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Just to repeat the question. The question was: does steaming or hot water prevent COVID? And does COVID happen only through breathing through the nose? Is that what I understood?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, COVID is a disease that is spread through respiratory droplets. So somebody who is within 6 feet of your distance, when they cough, when they sneeze, when they talk, there are these small particles that come out, and that through that route is how COVID spreads. So you can breathe it. Sometimes it can even go into your eyes or your mouth, and that itself is adequate as a significant risk of acquiring COVID. That is the reason we speak about masking yourself, cover your nose, cover your mouth, because the mode of transmission, irrespective of nose, mouth, it is through droplets. When you speak, when you sneeze, when you talk, when you scream, when you sing, these droplets are coming out, goes into your nose, goes into your mouth, can go into your eyes and cause COVID conjunctivitis. That's the reason why we wear mask covering your mouth, nose, and in hospitals we also wear eye shields or face mask and other things. It can also spread when you touch these droplets. So in your hands, when these droplets come in your immediate surrounding, and then if you're using these hands without cleaning to touch your eyes, nose or mouth, it can spread that way also. Steam or hot water is not going to prevent this. If the virus goes in and it sets in a infection within your throat or your nose lining, it goes within the cell. Whatever goes within the cell, we call it intracellular viral replication. What goes within is not going to get killed by the steam. It's not going to get killed by the hot water or whatever you do to kadas and other thing that you're taking. If you are exposed, you may be infected. You can get the infection. You may remain asymptomatic, or you may get symptomatic infection and leading to mostly mild, or some people may progress to severe disease. So the way to prevent is cover your nose, mouth, and frequently wash your hands. Now, the surface contamination that happens in the last year when we saw this whole, this diligence about taking care of everything, washing, sanitizing, that we have realized that surface-based contamination is very low if you wash hands frequently. It comes with the condition that as long as you wash your hands frequently and don't touch your nose and mouth, the possibility of transmission from surfaces is significantly reduced. And that's why we speak of surface transmission only in terms of household contact or close contact, or being in cabs, cars, wherein you're traveling for 2 or 3 hours, wherein you may possibly have these droplets onto the seat, and you may touch that without sanitizing your hands. Otherwise, it is predominantly through respiratory droplets. It becomes airborne because if you look at a crowd, if there's a huge crowd and people are screaming, the immediate vicinity of that, around those people, these particles get suspended in the air. And when it's suspended, it becomes airborne. So it is airborne in certain conditions, and those conditions are crowding and enclosed space crowding. So if you're in an AC house with a lot of people sitting in your house, or a mall with big crowd, then it becomes airborne through suspended particles. Otherwise, it is through respiratory droplets. And the surface-based transmission is almost negligible. Hot water, steam is not going to prevent or treat COVID. At best, it will help you in relieving your nasal blockage. Sir, you may want to add something?
No, I think you have made it very clear. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the next question, doctors. So while going for your morning walks, should you mask up, or what precautions should you take? Because there is again a myth, or there goes an information which says that while exercising, you should not not wear a mask. So for while exercising or going for your morning walks, how do you go about with the COVID precautions?
Yeah, when you're going for a morning walk, I assume that you are going outdoors, and when open outdoors, the chances of contracting COVID are reduced, provided you are not in a very crowded space. The chances of infection will increase if you are in a closed room, which has less ventilation, which has more crowd, and out of them, some of them may be COVID infected people. But if you are outdoors in a less crowded place, you are walking on the open road, for example, if there are not too many people around, but you have to wear a mask. There is no, it's just we are not used to wearing masks, so sometimes people feel that by wearing the mask they feel suffocated, or so for a walk that is not such a heavy or strenuous exercise, must wear a mask. Even for going for morning walk, just see that you are not going into any crowded area. You go outdoors with a good breeze around. Chances of getting infected are very low.
Yeah, Preeti ma'am, should I move to the next question?
Sure.
Yeah. The other question that they say is, in America, they're saying that double masking is very effective. So what is your take on the same, sir?
See, it is more than double masking. It is about effective masking. I mean, whatever mask you wear, if your mask is lying at the chin and you're, it's not what we are looking at effective prevention of air leak. So whatever mask you wear, if you wear a good surgical mask and there is no air leak, even a single surgical mask is effective. In community settings, we talk about how efficient your mask is. A lot of time, the kind of mask people wear are not efficient. You see those woven masks. You see some people wearing, those are not, they have got big pores and they may not. Wearing a double mask is like an additional protection that helps in prevention of air leak and does prevent. I mean, it's like two masks will take care of the job of a medicated mask, because ultimately you're looking at least 2 layers. In hospital, we speak of a minimum 3-ply mask. When we talk about 3-ply mask, there is an external fluid resistant layer, there is an internal absorptive layer and a filter in between. That's the kind of mask that helps us in preventing infection, acquiring infection in hospitals. By that standard, a double mask kind of, has a 2-layer system and definitely helps. But the most important message that should go is that effective masking, a mask lying at your chin is not effective masking. Mask coming down when you want to talk is not effective masking. So irrespective of the kind of mask you use, wear a good quality mask, but mask properly.
Dr. Anand, would you like to add something over here?
No, what she said is absolutely right. The way you tie your mask, if you lose, tie it loose and leave gaps around here or around here, then you are not effectively protected. So it is a method of tying and securing the mask which is most important. If you tie properly and wear a double mask, it is going to give you a better protection. Yes.
So thank you, doctors. Moving on to the next question, Dr. Pillai, as you rightly pointed out, that infection risk through airborne is much higher than the surface, through surface. So do you suggest that we stop sanitizing the parcels or the grocery items or the vegetables that we get from outside, which we are regularly
I've not been sanitizing. I've not been sanitizing. I've been ordering from, food delivery apps. I don't sanitize my grocery. I don't sanitize any of those things. It's really, it's a mental thing that we all developed when the first wave shocked us. We all went into a hyper OCD mode, but we don't need to know that. We don't need to be, obsessive about trying to sanitize everything. In fact, there are a lot of people who actually pour hand sanitizers over their packets and then open it. The risk of fire due to hand sanitizer is much more than actually a benefit due to that. If you start pouring it into your packets, there is really no need. Ensure that you wash your hands when you handle anything from outside, and wash your fruits and vegetables with plenty of water. That would be adequate.
Yes, from the seminar, then don't doctor la बोलवलं. इथे सगळे member ला काय करा काय नाही.
Sorry, doctor. You can continue, doctor. You were saying about the sanitizing of the surfaces and the parcels.
So surface transmission is almost negligible. 1 year into the pandemic, we know that it's negligible. As I told you, the only time when surface contamination is important is in close family contact. Like आपके घर पे कोई COVID है, or if that person is moving around and touching all surfaces, उनका जो hand जो door knobs वगैरह, because invariably we all touch our nose, hands, mouth, everything in a house, and that much level of surface contamination risk is there. But beyond that, it's not there, and you don't need to sanitize your packets coming from outside or whatever you buy from outside.
Thank you, Dr. Anand. So would you like to add something, or should we move on to the next question?
a very important thing that she has mentioned, because it will reduce the unnecessary and useless activity that we are all doing for so long. So, unless you have a patient in the house, okay, you have a patient in the house, then in that room, afterwards you may spray the table or all the surfaces or the doorknobs. But otherwise, there is no need to keep sanitizing objects. It is much better to sanitize your hands and not touch your face and eyes as much as possible.
Thank you, Doctor. Moving on to the next set of questions. Doctor, we have a lot of questions which states that after taking the first dose of the vaccination, people are showing up symptoms of fever and cough. What would you suggest the line of actions that they should take care, or what precautions they should take? And there are a lot of people who have also contracted with COVID after their vaccination. What would you suggest that what should be their line course of action again?
Yeah, it is a fact that we have seen patients turning out to be infected with COVID within, say, 7, 8 hours after taking the vaccine. And we suspect that, first of all, there may be a crowd at the vaccination center when we have seen that people are waiting for 2 hours, 3 hours before taking the vaccine. They may not be waiting in a sufficiently ventilated or spaced out area. They are waiting in a crowd. After the vaccine also, they are waiting for half an hour. And maybe they have contacted the virus over there before they got enough immunity from the vaccine itself. They have got infected. Or even if not at the vaccine center, they may have got COVID just before, even after taking the vaccine, because after all, this wave is really spreading very fast. So you see so many people getting infected. So if somebody is getting infected by COVID, even after taking the first dose and they have got full immunity, then it has to be treated like any other COVID. And so if you have fever or symptoms, body ache, cough, even if you have just taken a vaccine, you have to get tested. And if you are positive, you have to take all the treatment for COVID that anyone would take even if you are not vaccinated. We see questions that if you have taken a vaccine, you got COVID, recovered from that, should I take the second dose immediately? So as per government guidelines, they are saying that after you recover, after 14 days, you can take the dose and all that. But both Dr. Preeti and I feel from our experience that even if you are recovered from COVID, please wait for at least 2-3 months. What we are seeing is that once you are infected and recovered, people are not getting again infection. They are not getting reinfection for a few months. So your natural immunity is strong enough to protect you for at least a few months once you have been infected. Even in this second wave, the vast majority of patients that we are seeing are new patients who have not got COVID last year, and very, very few reinfections. So that means that there is some natural immunity which is protecting you. So then don't rush to take your second dose of the vaccine. Let the whole inflammation and the COVID effect subside totally. Wait for a couple of months or even 3 months before taking your next dose of vaccine.
Thank you, Doctor. Preeti Madam, would you like to add something, or move on to the next question?
I think sir is covered. As sir rightly pointed out, it is a clustering of crowding in the vaccination centers and poor COVID appropriate behavior that possibly leads to the infection after the vaccination, even before the vaccine immunity has actually set in. So don't be under the impression that I've got my shot and you can just take off your mask and throw it like some graduation ceremony, because you have to wait for some time for the vaccine effect to kick in. So COVID appropriate behavior has to be the norm. Okay, irrespective of your vaccination status, irrespective of your infection status. And as sir rightly pointed out, we are not seeing as many reinfections as we thought. All that we're seeing in the second wave is a non-infected getting infected. So natural infection does help to some extent. So don't be in a hurry to get your second dose if you have got the infection between doses.
Thank you, Doctor. Prachi, what's the next question that we have over here?
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, Prachi, please.
Yeah. So the next question is, my mother-in-law had a negative COVID RT-PCR, but her HRCT showed infection. So which test we are supposed to trust for identifying if it is COVID?
See, as I said earlier also in my presentation, the RT-PCR is the test in which we swab the nose or the throat and we find out the genetic material of the virus to confirm it. Like any test, these tests are not 100%. Like the ability of the test to pick up the genetic material may range from 60 to 70%, depending upon how it's collected, what stage of the disease you do the test and other things. So if the PCR is negative, but you have symptoms of COVID, or if the PCR is negative and you have family member with confirmed COVID and you realize that you're still continuing to have symptoms, a CT scan helps in diagnosing COVID. So CT is like a second step to diagnose COVID when the tests are negative, because it's difficult to keep on doing repeat PCR. In hospitals, when somebody is admitted, they're negative, we used to do repeat PCR to confirm it. A lot of times we even, collect samples from the lower respiratory tract to confirm it. So by repeating these tests, we may be able to confirm it, but it's not easy in home setting. CT is a good non-invasive test for us to diagnose COVID when you do it at the right time. You do it on day 1, it may be normal, but if you have progressive symptoms, by day 5, day 6, we may have typical features suggestive of COVID. Now we all know how to recognize COVID on CT. So the features are so classical and with the right risk factor. So if you are sitting in a house with people with COVID, diagnosed COVID, to me, there is no other doubt that the person has COVID, irrespective of the CT report, irrespective of the PCR report. No, we are all managing patients who one person has got loss of smell, loss of taste at home. One person has been reported positive. There are two more members who are negative, but they continue to have symptoms. At some stage, they come back with dropped oxygen. So we don't need any test to diagnose it. The clinical and the risk factors are adequate for us to confirm. When you have a family with COVID, you have dropped oxygen, for all practical purpose, that's adequate for us to call that this person has COVID. A CT will definitely confirm it, because if you have dropped oxygen, the CT features are classical of COVID pneumonia. Sir, anything else you would want to add?
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, COVID patients are treated with treatments and injections like plasma therapy or, other injections. How does it affect patients, and what are the precautions we need to take before, after the patient has been back home?
Okay, there are a lot of medications which hospitalization may get. Now, fortunately, remdesivir is not a very toxic drug. We monitor in the hospital with some blood tests. Like in rare patients, the liver may be affected with remdesivir, but we keep a watch on that and stop the injection if the patient is not tolerating it. But afterwards, we don't think, after completing a course of remdesivir successfully, later on there are no long-term side effects of remdesivir. What about other medicines? The other most important medicine, more than remdesivir, is steroids. Now, steroids do have side effects. They are life-saving drugs, and we try to use them for the minimum number of days as much as possible. So usually a patient who is hospitalized has to be given steroids. Minimum course is 5 days of injections of steroid. And after that, we try to stop the steroid as soon as possible. If the patient gets again fever or breathlessness, then we cannot stop the steroid suddenly. Slowly we go on reducing the dose of steroids to say every 3 days or 4 days we reduce the. Sometimes the patient is discharged with steroid tablet at home. Steroids, definitely there are side effects to watch out for. Patient gets weakness, the sugar may go up. Even if the patient does not have diabetes before, after steroids, the sugars may go up because of the infection and because of the stress and because of steroids. There may be muscle weakness, weakness in the bone. So it is better that every individual patient before discharge will talk to his doctor and ask what side effects he may expect at home, because steroids do have side effects, but they'll be managed. Patient has to take adequate rest, increase the protein intake at home, and gradually as the steroid dose is tapered off, they will recover from the weakness by and large. What about the other medicines? Some patients may be given blood thinner. This is very important in COVID. In hospital, patients are given injections of blood thinner, but at home, they will be given some tablets. This is because some patients of COVID develop excessive blood clotting. And if the clots occur in the wrong place, in the lungs, on the waist, it can land up with problems. So these blood thinners may be continued for a few weeks or even up to 3 months at home. So if you are given a strong blood thinner at home, sometimes it can cause bleeding. Like if the blood becomes too thin, then the patient may have bleeding in the urine or in the stool. So this can be a possible side effect of high dose blood thinner if it is given. It is very uncommon. All that has to be done is stop the blood thinner usually, and that is enough. So again, it is important that a patient who is getting discharged from hospital should tell the doctor, am I being given blood thinners? What should I watch out for? Other than these, the patient may receive antibiotics, sometimes even higher antibiotics. They are not useful for COVID itself, but if the patient in addition gets some bacterial infection, then these medicines are very useful. Antibiotics can cause side effects like weakness or diarrhea or ulcers in the mouth, and they can be taken care of by proper guidance from the doctor. So usually the common advice would be take a proper diet, increase your protein intake, take adequate rest after when people feel weakness for a few days, and gradually build up your strength with proper exercises, maybe breathing exercises, maybe pranayam or yogic exercises, which are useful to some patients for recovery of their lungs.
Preeti ma'am, would you like to add something?
No, I think sir has covered most of the things. Okay. The only thing that I want to say is that, it's a new disease. We are also learning as over the last 1 year, we are learning new things about this virus itself. And all the therapies are they're all experimental to a great extent, because what we have found is that what works best is steroid during that crucial period when the pneumonia happens and when the oxygen drops. So that becomes our life-saving drug, blood thinners, because we have seen a lot of people coming with clot. And there will be a downside to it. Downside of steroids are risk of infections and other things. And the other thing is COVID itself potentially puts you at risk of certain fungal infections. So we are seeing people going back home and sometimes coming back with fungal infections. Not just related to the steroid, but it also could be that COVID itself puts them at risk of developing this. So your general health, ensuring that, you do incentive spiros, you keep your sugars under check. Most people that we're worried about are the diabetics, because if the sugars are haywire, then it, potentially adds to the problem. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to stop the steroids completely, because a lot of patients remain oxygen dependent. As soon as oxygen is removed, they do drop. So we have to take a risk benefit path and decide what is absolutely needed. And sometimes these drugs are needed, but we give them a close, we tell them what you need to look for. So what to look for are these things: new fever, sudden drop in oxygenation, swelling in your legs, because that means there could be a clot in your leg, or bleeding from your stools, or, sudden swelling over your sinuses, a discharge from your nose, or a black, ulcer in your mouth. So these are the things to watch for, and you need to be in follow-up with your treating doctor so that these things can be picked up early. But all these things are in a setting of somebody with severe disease. A lot of people with mild disease recover without any problems. Just continue to be active, and that's it. Don't be anxious. A good number of people have got psychological problems post-COVID due to isolation, the fear, the anxiety. So these are one more, another facet to this disease that needs to be monitored at home.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, what we just spoke about is what happens in those severe scenarios. How does the drug affect them? But in most of the patients, as you stated, like 80% of the patients can be treated at home. So in those cases, what is the post-COVID care that one should take? What exercise and diet they should follow? And after what period of time can they continue with their normal exercises if they were doing it before COVID, sir?
So should I take... So when we look at the spectrum of people who are managed at home, the asymptomatic ones, they never report any symptoms. So you end up monitoring them for 2 weeks to watch for complications. They are fine and they are back to their routine with or without COVID. Basically, what you're more interested in, the isolation to prevent transmission of infection. So as soon as their isolation period is over, they're good to go and lead your normal life. Monitoring is needed for certain group of people: diabetics, elderly, people with risk factors. They may still, we have seen some people coming at 3rd week, 4th week of illness with pneumonia or drop in oxygen. So people with risk factors need to be a little more vigilant till the 4th week from your beginning of symptoms. So that is the beginning of symptoms of being tested positive. But otherwise, most people after their isolation can be absolutely fine. Now, people who report loss of smell, loss of taste, in most of them, it recovers completely within 2 weeks or at best 3 weeks. Some people, it takes a long time. And in them, we talk about retraining, smell retraining therapy or olfactory retraining therapy. What it means is that, get your brain to recognize these smells again. So make these smelling bags of lemongrass, coffee, and ask them to smell if there is a delayed recovery of your loss of smell. Otherwise, mild people are absolutely good to go. Do incentive spirometry if you've had mild pneumonia. Incentive spirometry is, breathing through a tube with a ball attached, and it helps improve your vital capacity. And be active. Inactivity matlab there is a risk of clot. So being active, doing your breathing exercises, monitoring for complications in high risk people, and completing your isolation period to prevent transmission to community. These would be the main things for people with mild disease.
Dr. Bhave, would you like to add anything or move on to the next question?
Please proceed with the next.
So there's one question that is popping up, is that once you're contracted with COVID, what is the probability of you being recontracted with COVID? And should you be as vigilant as you were before, even after you were contracted again?
Yeah, definitely. First, I will say that you should be vigilant. You continue to be vigilant in the sense that, avoid crowded spaces, wear your mask, avoid your face and nose, and take those precautions. Now, having said that, as we just mentioned some time back, what we are seeing so far is that the number of new cases getting infection for the first time is very much higher than the number of reinfections. There are reinfections. It's not that they're not there, but they are a very small fraction. So, you should sort of assume that you have some protection, some natural immunity once you are infected for at least few months. Now, there are speculations that, every virus keeps on mutating. These viruses multiply so fast. Every time they multiply, there are small errors in the copies that they make of themselves, right? Viruses make copies of themselves, and these copies may not be exactly the same as before. So those changes, they change the virus. That's what we call mutation. So some mutations they can change the virus in some way that the virus may become, faster spreading than before. Like the mutation we see in India is spreading faster than the first wave. Then can be, if the virus changes too much, then your immunity may be ready to fight with the earlier version of the virus. It may not be able to fight the new version of the virus, but that has not happened so far. Yes, mutations are there, but so far, the people who were infected last year are still managing to fight and prevent getting reinfected. But it can happen next year that the new mutant may be resistant to your immunity. But so far, that did not happen. So you should hear, but at the same time, don't throw caution to the winds. You must continue to take precaution.
See, COVID appropriate behavior needs to be adopted as a change for good. I mean, we are going to live with this virus for a pretty long time. So all of us have to adopt that. So never unmask in public should be a motto that all of us should have, because we don't know how this virus is going to evolve over a period of time. We don't know how effective our vaccinations would be. A risk of infection, whether it is there or not, it's too early to say. All we know is that a good number of people have not gotten, in fact, majority have not gotten reinfected. Only people that we have seen who have reinfected are the people who are unlikely to mount an immune response. So elderly people or people who have had cancers, blood cancers and all, they have come back with reinfection, or somebody with a kidney disease. So rather than, being saying that, okay, infection reduces my risk or vaccination reduces my risk, let's be very, very clear that COVID appropriate behavior should be adopted as a part of life and live with it. So that should be the norm. Don't think about previous infection. Don't think about vaccination status. but vaccination is very important to break the chain. That's the only way we'll be able to get out of the calamity that we are facing now.
Thank you. Doctor, as you rightly mentioned about the mutation of the COVID virus, the another question that was being asked, that is there any new symptoms that we should watch for? And also in case of asymptomatic patients who don't have fever or cold, but is there any other symptoms that could indicate COVID and that you should be careful about?
Yeah, the main symptoms of COVID, fever is probably the most important or commonest symptom. And people are under this have to have high fever. They tend to feel, okay, I've just got 99 fever or 100 fever, so I don't want to do the test. That is not right. In fact, low-grade fever is the most commonest symptom of COVID, whether in the last wave or in this wave. And then come the other symptoms, that is your cough, may or may not be some throat pain, may or may not be cold. But what we often see is in older people, they just come with extreme weakness. They're finding it difficult to get up, walk. They're just feeling like not doing anything. Fever may be very, very low, and that may be COVID. There are some people who have had diarrhea and bit of fever, weakness, and that they turn out to be COVID. So diarrhea and severe weakness, body ache, headache, they are important symptoms to suspect COVID. And also, of course, change in taste or smell or loss of taste or smell, along with these, is also an indicating symptom of COVID. Other than that, the other symptoms of COVID, I would call rather rare as presenting symptoms. But then we sometimes see a patient who comes with a heart attack and you do a test and that is positive. So such a rare patient. Or patient comes with a paralytic attack, a stroke. Because as we said, COVID can cause excessive clotting of blood. And these people may suddenly have a clot in the heart and they have not noticed other symptoms before, but they develop a heart attack and come to hospital and they turn out to be COVID. So there are some other presentations of COVID also.
Thank you, sir. Now we are starting with vaccinations question. So the first question is, I have sleep apnea and using auto BiPAP machine since last 3 years, taking medicines for cholesterol and BP. His age is 40 and he's overweight. So is he asking that if the vaccination is safe to be taken? And if yes, which vaccine he should take? Covishield, Covaxin or Sputnik? And if he should take it, then is he needed any specific medical consultation? This is the first question for the vaccine.
Yeah, Dr. Preetam?
Yeah, so see, basically, vaccination is needed. There is no doubt about it. The person whose characteristics are described, medical comorbidities, is again at higher risk of developing a severe COVID disease. In this setting, vaccination is needed. Now, when we had access to a vaccine, we had no choice. And for us, what is first available is the best choice for you. So even for the community, I'll say what is first available is the best choice of vaccine. As of now, there are no head-to-head comparisons between different vaccines to say that this is better, or this is better in what population. Everything is just a year old, and usually vaccines need 4 or 5 years for us to really define which population it works best, what is the immunity. All we know is that right now, the need of the hour is to ensure that the maximum number of people are vaccinated. So you take the vaccine, what is the first available vaccine to you, and don't try to pick and choose between vaccines. There are, minor variation between all vaccines. There are pros and cons, but overall these vaccines now, so many million people have been given and all of us have been vaccinated and there are no major concerns. So just have faith and take the vaccine.
Okay.
So first available vaccine should be taken. That's what, sir, you may want to add something more.
It is absolutely right. Everything is new. All the vaccines are given emergency use authorization. So it's not like we have these vaccines for last 10 years. We have studied them. We have tried the vaccine in pregnancy, tried the vaccine in older people against different mutant. If we have all that data, we may be able to give you, better advice, which vaccine is suitable in your case and all that. This is all new. All these vaccines have been developed at a very rapid speed. to because there was no time. Otherwise, the pandemic is already affecting the entire world. And to come out of this, we needed vaccines in an emergency. And that is exactly what the authorization is given, Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. So, of course, now that doesn't mean all of us are guinea pig. The vaccine technology and the studies are going on for decades. And that is why this could happen. That the disease started in October, November of 2019. And by January, February, we already knew the entire genetic structure of the virus because of this background that we are now so advanced in science. So because of that, they could make the vaccine immediately. They could do the test. So this is a record achievement by the human race to develop a vaccine within a few months after discovering a new virus. It is not that there is no research behind it, but for an individual vaccine to be compared, we will take time. We'll need at least a few years before deciding which vaccine and to be taken or which is better or not. Now, even between, say, Covishield and Covaxin, Covishield is the AstraZeneca vaccine, and it has already been used in lakhs of people in UK, in Europe, and in India. Almost 5 crore people must have taken Covishield by now. And there are occasional or very rare side effects which have been which are less than 1 in 3 lakhs or 1 in 2.5 lakhs or so. Where occasionally people have got blood clots, etc. This is a fact. Covaxin is still newer, and much less number of people have got Covaxin. It is still must be in thousands or few lakhs. So you cannot compare something which is very new to something which has been used in more than 5 crore people. So only when we use Covaxin in lot more people, we will know whether it has any side effects or not. But the side effects are so rare that the risk is very much there. Any one of us can get COVID, and that risk is far more than any imagined fear against the vaccine. So the risk-benefit ratio strongly lies in taking the vaccine. We have all taken the doctors and healthcare workers were given the vaccine first, and that time only Covishield was mostly available. We have taken it and developed some antibodies, and they're doing the work. So whichever vaccine is available, please take it.
Okay, so our next question was related to that. So that Covishield vaccine has caused some blood clot problems when administered to patient under the age of 30 in Europe. So what is your advice to the 30s in India that if we go for the other option or we should go for the Covishield? So you just, yeah, thank you for the explanation.
And one more addition was that how do you monitor a blood clot that you develop after taking a vaccine? Is there any particular method or is there any particular test that one should undergo?
Okay, you should not routinely test because it's something which has been reported, say 1 in 2.5 or 3 lakh people. Basically, what has been seen was there were some blood clots. People developed some red spots on the body because of drop in the number of platelets. And according to where was the blood clot, either in the tummy, they developed a tummy pain, or some people developed a headache because of a clot in the head, etc. There are very, very few cases. Like suppose they have some 150 cases out of 5 crores. So even to correlate whether that is due to the vaccine or not, that is also a question. But if you really want to monitor, don't do any tests or anything. If you develop any complaints after the vaccine, now all these cases which were reported were between 4 to 20 days after taking the vaccine. So if you have taken the vaccine, you're all right for 15 to 20 days, then forget about all these clots and all. So, but if you develop a headache or pain in the tummy and you develop red spots on the body or a rash, then please go to the doctor, inform that I have taken this vaccine so many days back. Do I need to get any investigation done? And the research on these cases has been done. They have found out why the blood clot is developing in a few cases, and they have found a medicine for it also. So don't panic.
Okay. Should we proceed with the next question, Preeti ma'am, or would you like to add something?
No, I think sir is covered. The thing to monitor is that first 14 to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, watch for severe headache, watch for any spots over your body, any abdominal pain. But then again, the risk is really, the numbers are really, really small. And most of the things have been reported in the European nations where genetically they have a higher risk of having venous clots, which is not, genetically we don't have that much high risk, but we all need to be vigilant. Okay. So, and pediatric vaccination where we have the maximum experience, none of these vaccines are without side effects, but statistically the risk of side effect is really low. That's why these vaccines are approved. So if you compare the statistical risk of having a complication in pediatric vaccines versus what is available, then again the number is really low. Here it is more about how do we get from this situation that we are in, and if vaccination is the only way, so we'll have to ensure that we vaccinate. And of course, we have to monitor. If 2 weeks following your vaccination, watch for these symptoms and report immediately so that the needful can be done medically.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question is, foreign vaccines like Pfizer, Moderna, and Sputnik V, can they yield different results on the Indian variants than they did it in the West countries?
So you are taking?
Yeah, this is actually a speculative answer, because how will you know whether they are effective in India or not? If you give it to large number of people, if you give Pfizer vaccine in India and then see for next few months how many of them get infected, that is the only way to be sure to give this answer. So we cannot answer this for sure, but as a general sort of guesswork, if you do, the very fact that once you get infected, you are not getting reinfected, means that although so many mutants have come, we are still having some immunity against them. So it's a reasonable expectation that probably even with a vaccine, it will still continue to work. But to give an exact scientific answer to that, you have to try those vaccines in India and take a trial and watch for a few months. Then only you can know. Your views on that?
No, sir, it's the same. Like
About
we really
Sputnik
don't know,
all?
but yeah, we really don't know whether
We
any of
expect
these
that they will
vaccines
work.
are different. But they should work. There are no reasons to believe that they will
They
not
should,
work.
yeah.
So, and Pfizer and Moderna, at least statistically, they have shown the best results in terms of outcome and immunity and efficacy and other
Yes.
things. So there is no reason to believe that it will be any different in India. Unless we really prove that, there is an immune escape, it's very difficult to say.
Okay. So the next question is whether can a brain stroke patient can take a COVID injection, as someone had brain stroke in September 2020. Yeah.
Yes, that person should be taking. He has comorbidities. The risk of developing a severe disease is there. So he's just like any other person with comorbidities and should take the vaccine. In fact, for above 45, that was one of the cardiovascular diseases were one of the risk factors being given approval for taking vaccine. So they should be taking the vaccine.
Anand sir, would you like to add something?
No, this is not a matter of discussion at all. He definitely needs a vaccine. No discussion.
As of today, anybody above 18 should be vaccinated. We have approval to vaccinate everybody above 18. So there are nobody who should not be vaccinated. There may be very small group of people whom we don't know whether they'll mount a good response. And those are the only people who should discuss with their doctors and make a decision whether the benefit of vaccination is there or not. But otherwise, universally, we have to vaccinate everybody above 18.
Okay.
Ma'am, the next question is that can women take vaccination during the menstrual cycle or immediately after the menstrual cycle? Are there any myths around it, and can you help us?
There are no myths. This is just a WhatsApp forward. Why should a woman have a low immunity during menses? Why should a woman's body be any different than different? So it's absolutely a wrong thing to forward in WhatsApp. Everybody, woman is no different. She will mount the same immune response like anybody else. Menses are physiological. So Please don't go by the WhatsApp forward. There's nothing into it.
There is one more question that was being asked, that a myth that is going, that if you had COVID, then is it sufficient enough just to take one dose of the vaccine and you don't have to take the other dose?
See, it is true that if you have COVID once, you already have some immunity, you have antibodies, you have your immune cells ready. If you take so I think you'll get a boost, that immunity will be boosted. But I mean, there is every reason that you complete your schedule, take the other dose also. There's no reason not to take it. Only thing, as we said earlier, that if you have had COVID, don't rush to take a vaccine immediately after 14 days after recovery and all that. Please wait for a couple of months and then start your vaccine schedule. Do take the next dose. Because it has been shown that if you take the second dose, you will get an even further boost in your immunity.
So in the beginning, there was this mention that even a single dose is adequate following post-COVID infection. But our our recommendation for our country is to complete your vaccination series. So it should be followed because as of now, we don't even know the duration of these immunity. So why take a partial vaccine? Please take your full dose, irrespective of your prior infection.
Thank you, ma'am. The next series of question is about plasma donation now. So we'll move on with that. For plasma donation, it is said that after 20 days of vaccination till the 45th day or second dose, the same can be done. There is a lot of confusion and therefore clarity is required.
Additionally, can you also throw light upon who can be plasma donors and what and when is it needed? So if you could throw light on all those issues revolving plasma, we could cover a couple of questions in one answer, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. Basically, the plasma therapy has been tried because those people from it, they generally have antibodies against the virus, right? Ready-made antibodies. So especially those who had severe COVID, they will have more antibodies in their blood. This antibody level is called the titer or titer of antibodies. So if you have a very high titer of antibodies in your blood after you have recovered from COVID, you may donate that blood. Out of that, the blood cells are separated and only plasma is taken because that contains the ready-made antibody. And if you give it to a patient at the right time, this right time is a very difficult thing to achieve because the course of disease in COVID is that initially the virus goes on multiplying and that happens for the first 5, 6 or 7 days. And after that, the patient is going to make his own antibody and mounts an immune response. So if you give the antibodies in the first few days, second, third, fourth or fifth day, then it makes some sense because you are providing some ready-made antibodies to the patient before the patient has made his own antibody. But somehow we do feel that this plasma therapy is being a little overrated. Already many of the guidelines are removing that plasma therapy as a main component of treatment from the guidelines. But anyway, if you have to give it, you need a patient who has recovered from COVID, who is fully recovered, who has mounted a good response. They measure the antibody level in the donor and then separate his plasma and give 1 or 2 units of that plasma to the patient. That is the whole concept of plasma. Now, obviously, a person who can donate plasma has to be healthy himself and free from any other concurrent infection or any other disease. Otherwise, his plasma cannot be taken. I saw one question where they were asking that whether a woman can donate plasma. Now, there is sometimes a condition that a lady who has delivered children, okay, she may be having certain kind of antibodies. They are known as anti-HLA antibodies because she has blended with her own baby in the womb, and she may have made some antibodies against the HLA antigens, which are other not the usual AB blood group antigens. They are different antigens. But if those antibodies are in her blood, and if her blood is given to another patient, then that patient may develop a reaction because of that. So usually plasma donation should not be taken from ladies who have born children. That was one of the questions which I saw. And there is any other topic with plasma?
So you have almost answered everything covering the plasma in one go itself. Ma'am, would you like to add something, or we move on to the next?
Sir has covered most of it.
So next questions are pretty much general. I don't know how much we could answer this, but what age group is the new wave targeting? Who are getting the most affected is something that people want to know.
Okay, see this last wave also we saw a good number of young people coming with severe disease. Okay, right now what we are seeing is an explosion of cases. Like what we saw over 3 to 4 months in last wave, we have seen over 3 weeks. Because of that, the actual number of people, young people coming to us is higher, and we believe that. And then there's a sudden thing, oh, is it affecting the younger group? Basically, the virus affects everybody equally. And the severity of the disease, okay, maybe different. We don't know whether there are mutation which is affecting people differently or the genetics which is playing. But the main thing is the behavior. I mean, this wave, the people were all out. The number of people who are exposed were much, much higher. So the number of people affected are much higher. And the total number of people affected over a small period of time, that means the total number of young people we are seeing are much higher. It's really difficult to say whether it is targeting younger people or whether it is targeting older people. To some extent, maybe a good number of people got vaccinated, immune, so relatively we are seeing a higher number of young people coming with severe disease. But the severity of the illness we did see in last wave as well. Young people had come with severe disease, whether it is 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old. One of the other concerns are now more people are home managed. Last wave, everybody was quarantined and they were picked up early when they developed a symptom enough to warrant aggressive therapy, and then they were hospitalized and managed. But now, because a greater proportion of people are home managed, this recognition of severity of the illness happens a little late, and that's why we are seeing more mortality probably in the 40 to 50 year age group. And also we had a lockdown quite early last year. When the cases were really in hundreds, we went into complete shutdown and a more rigorous lockdown. So the number of people being exposed, the kind of people were exposed were quite different. And that's also the reason why this way we are seeing more numbers affected, more younger population affected. This is more a dynamics not related to virus, but related to the human behavior. I don't see the viruses, targeting somebody differently. Similarly, now when all of us get immune by vaccination, then the relative risk to the kids would be more because the kids are not being vaccinated. So then maybe in the next wave, we may see more kids coming with severe disease. Doesn't mean that the virus is acting differently. We are protecting the elder ones. So now actual number of younger people whom we see are much higher. So it's more of that than really a virus affecting people differently. And of course, human behavior. The dynamics of spread is through human behavior only, and that is the main thing. So if we control that, we control the age group affected.
So should we proceed, or you want to add something, sir?
No, this is very good analysis, because everywhere we see posts that the virus has shown mutations and it is now very different, and a list of things that how this time the virus is different. At the most, we may say that it is slightly more infectious, but even the last time it was quite infectious. The whole setup has changed. Last time we had a wave during the lockdown, and now we are having a wave when we are all freely indulging in the normal behavior as if there was no COVID. So there is not too much difference. The mutation is there, but it's affecting, anyone who is exposed is affected.
Doctor, there was one sorry. Yes, ma'am.
There was a complacency that set in, as soon as the vaccination got released, or the fact that in 1 year, we did really well in terms of knowing how to manage the patients, reducing mortality and everything. So everybody felt that, हाँ ठीक है, infection हो जाएगा, हम अस्पताल जाएंगे, 5 दिन रेमडेसिविर मिलेगा, 2-3 दिन ऑक्सीजन मिल जाएगा, ठीक होके घर आएंगे. No, that was the attitude in general in the pop community. And now suddenly the spurt of infections have overwhelmed the healthcare, and because of that, we are not able to pick up people who are actually going to need specialized care, and that is why we are seeing more deaths. It's not because, and obviously the shortage of the medications and the differential, facilities available in different parts of India. So it's all human. I mean, it's not the virus possibly is just sitting and wondering what we are doing. So
the next question that we have is about what temperature that one should monitor. Is it 99 degrees or what that will be considered as fever for COVID? And what should be the minimum oxygen level that you are monitoring should be maintained even when you're at home?
Fever is anything above your normal body temperature. You know, a lot of people call us and say, my temperature, I have temperature, it's 97, 98, 98.2. These are all normal temperatures. And there is always a variation in your temperature. Morning, you may be having a different temperature. By evening, it may be 0.5 degree, higher. Also, what you use to measure temperature, whether you're using a digital thermometer, whether you're using an infrared thermometer, or whether you're using your, mercury thermometer. But any fever, if you subjectively feel feverish and there is a temperature even 99, 99.2, that is fever to me. But if you just say, especially in the COVID times, and what we have realized is COVID has got two phases of fever. A lot of people report 2 days of fever, it disappears, and then they start, after 5-6 days complaining of very high fever. And that is that very high fever is when we are worried about, the complications coming in. So it's just not absolute numbers. Let's not, every time a doctor is asked to interpret 99 and 98, 100, kya kare? For me, 100 at day 7 or 8 of illness is definitely more worrisome than 100 at day 1. So, or 99.2 even happening at day 11, day 12 may be concerning. So it's not the absolute numbers. If you have normal temperature, nothing to worry. Normal is 98.6, so normal up to 99.2 in the evening is considered normal. Anything above that is fever. And that fever first 3-4 days is like a simple viral fever. Anything beyond that 5th day, 6th day is concerning. And the COVID serious fever is, they always report 101, 102, continuously ongoing. Even after Dolo or paracetamol, it comes down and again goes back. That fever in a COVID patient is concerning to me at whatever phase of the illness, because those are the patients who rapidly progress and require oxygen, sometimes within a span of even 12 hours. So that is definitely, that would be concerning. So you have any more to add?
If you could highlight about the minimum oximeter readings that we should maintain.
See, normal oxygen for anybody, any healthy adult, normal oxygen is between 97 to 100. Now, if you have elderly people in your house who's got COPD, some underlying chronic lung conditions, they might possibly have an oxygen level which is ranging from 94 to 95. For them, that is their normal. So for any normal healthy adult, 97 to 100 in spite of your walking. At times even 96. So 96 to 100 is considered as normal. Anything below 95 is concerning. Okay. And any drop more than 4%. So if your baseline, if your elderly members in your family maintains a baseline saturation of 94 to 95 and more than 4% drop, so the 94 becomes 91 for them, that is relative drop in oxygen, oxygen deficiency may progress and is better managed in a hospital. And normal people, any drop more than 4%. So in a normal person below 95, young healthy people, and you say that my pulse oximeter is consistently showing 94, that is concerning. Okay. And most important thing is while we walk, like we may maintain a normal oxygen level when we are resting. But as soon as we start walking and it shows a drop, after a 6-minute walk, it shows a drop, that is also concerning. So that is why we insist our patients check that every 4 hours, and during your waking hours, walk for 6 minutes and check. So at least 2 to 3 times do that. So we'll pick up these relative oxygen deficiency early. So we were able to get them into a hospital as early as possible. So any drop below 95, 94 or lower is oxygen deficiency. 4% drop from your baseline. This is more important for your elderly people at home who may have a normal saturation of 90. The other concerns a lot of time is how do I check mine? Because a lot of times they say as soon as they put it showed 92 and now it is 96. So you have to see whether the pulse oximeter is sensing properly. If the battery is not placed properly, if you have not placed your finger properly, or if you have severe chills, or if your hands are cold, it may erroneously show a wrong reading. So wait for your pulse oximeter to see the give a proper reading. At times, if it's giving some erroneous reading, check in other fingers before confirming that it's really low. Otherwise, a lot of panic calls will happen to your doctor that it is showing 92, 94. So consistent reading is also important, which happens within 15 to 30 seconds. You mostly get a proper reading on your pulse oximeter.
Yeah, ma'am, there's another question in the chat box that has been asked that the patient had some fever, had a loss of smell, but he never got himself tested. He isolated himself in the home, and he was all well after it. So now that he was not officially detected COVID positive, can he still go for vaccination, or should he wait for a period of 3 months, as you suggested earlier?
So he has had mild disease, so you will have to count from that day of symptom, and whenever he notices first symptoms, and consider that as his first day. Remain isolated for at least 14 days from that symptom. And about vaccination, as sir said, government, our guidelines say after quarantine period is over, you're fit to go. But our experience says that it's better to wait. So for people with mild illness, we usually recommend 6 to 8 weeks from your symptoms. And people with severe disease, so this person falls into the mild category. So couple of months, 6 to 8 weeks is adequate. Or if they are very keen on getting vaccinated as early, then at least after 4 weeks, not earlier than that. Because a lot of people may report your mild symptoms is an acute COVID symptom, and later on you can get a pneumonia in second, third week, which can happen to people who are old. So mild symptoms, and 10% of people who have really no symptoms, asymptomatics, can still get pneumonia. So I would urge anybody who's had COVID-like symptoms, not tested positive, to still at least wait for 4 weeks, and ideally between 6 to 8 weeks, you should take a vaccine, not earlier than that. And as of now, in this pandemic, anybody with loss of smell is COVID. In fact, there are enough WhatsApp forwards and jokes about that. No, so loss of smell is a good way to say that you had COVID or not.
Okay, Swapnil, I'm taking the next question. So, ma'am, can a diabetic patient who are on insulin can continue their insulin after vaccination? And do they need to take some precaution, or they should have any alteration in insulin taking after the vaccination?
See, the dose of insulin is dependent on your intake and your sugar levels. There is no relation to vaccine. So you have any other, so post-vaccine, some people
have to continue to take your doses and monitor your sugar. At the most, because of vaccine, the common side effects are pain in the arm and maybe some body ache and fever for some days. Commonest. Sometimes the fever may continue for more than a couple of days, may go on for 3-4 days also. But if it continues longer, then we are forced to do the COVID test. But sugar monitoring, BP management, and your usual medicine should continue as they were.
Yeah, vaccination should not be, different. Your medication should not change because of vaccination. Unless, of course, you're vomiting, your intake is reduced. So again, it is dependent on your sugar. So you liaise with your physician accordingly, do it, but not related to vaccine. No change per se.
Ma'am, the next set of questions was, just give me a minute, please. Are Ayurvedic and allopathic medicines effective in COVID or for COVID patients?
Okay. So, see, as of now, including allopathic medication, there are no medications clearly which can prevent progression to severe disease. I'll just give an example. This virus is like a bullet. Bullet chhod diya, it does something to your body. It triggers a response, and in a very, very small proportion of people, they get that pneumonia. And what the medication that we give are purely experimental. Whether we're giving you drugs to manage at home or in the hospital, they are not like 100% effective trying to prevent you from getting a severe disease. Hospitalization is we are monitoring your complications and giving you treatment for those complications. By that standards, whether it is Ayurvedic, whether it is any alternative therapy, they are not going to change in any way your risk of getting the infection, you getting a mild or severe disease. So I don't think so. No medication is going to be 100% effective. So none of these medication, whether it is Coronil, whether it is arsenic album, whether it is Cardas, or any of these things are going to be different. A very small proportion of people develop a severe disease and we manage those severity. by giving oxygen as a supportive therapy, by giving blood thinners, by reducing the body's inflammation by giving steroids. So these are the only 3 modalities that is of proven benefit. Rest everything is experimental. So, but we give it because if there is some benefit, we want to pass on that benefit to patients. We have enough research over 1 year and we have recognized, okay, these things work. So why not give it, even if that 1% it benefits, we give it to a patient. That doesn't mean that these works are some miracle pills or miracle cure. Nothing is. There is no miracle. Please believe us. There's really no miracle. And a lot of people sit at home and take these medications and say कि हमने दवाई ले रहे, हमारे डॉक्टर ने दिया है, हम ठीक हो जाएंगे, बुखार आ रहा है, they will, there is a denial to accept that in spite of these medications, you're likely to progress. So if you have problems, get hospitalized. But don't sit in that pseudo security that everything is all right. Symptoms are important. You have to monitor them, irrespective of whether it is allopathic, Ayurvedic, or whatever medication you're taking.
Yeah, that's the proper answer. I'll give an example of another disease, say jaundice. Many people believe that there is some Ayurvedic remedy for common infectious hepatitis. Jaundice is a common thing. Most people who get a viral hepatitis, they have the symptoms, nausea, they get yellow, and they have vomiting, pain in the abdomen, fever, and the symptoms recover after 2 or 3 weeks, and they are all right. Okay, so they are going to get all right, whatever medicine they take or don't take. So if somebody, may take some Ayurvedic medicine, he says, I became all right. Somebody does that, Jantar Mantar or Kavil Utarna and all that, he becomes all right. Somebody does nothing, he becomes all right. So somebody comes to a modern medicine doctor and he takes some liver tonic, he also becomes all right. So can you give credit to that medicine if the person is going to get well on his own? So in COVID, as we know, so 80% of the people are getting all right. They will have fever for a few days or even no symptoms at all. And they just need to take a paracetamol to control the fever. They get all right. So in that period, they have taken vitamins, they have taken Ayurvedic, they have taken antibiotics, they have taken all sorts of things. Okay. So the credit not necessarily goes to the medicine. Right?
Okay.
But the whole world wants just now. We are looking for a medicine. If you give that medicine as soon as the COVID is detected, that person should not land up in hospital later. Okay, aisa medicine hai hi nahi. There is no medicine which you start early and you will not have to go to hospital. Aisa kuch nahi hai. We are trying some medicines, like they have come up with a medicine called Favipiravir. Okay, what's the logic? Logic is that Favipiravir may kill the virus. So we are hoping that if it kills the virus, then person may not develop to go to hospital later. But that is not true. I mean, some people, you give Favipiravir or give anything else, they still develop a pneumonia and become serious. So there is no magic pill that can prevent you from becoming serious if you have COVID. So therefore, question of whether Ayurvedic or allopathic or it doesn't arise. We don't have a magic pill. As she said, we know that if a person is getting pneumonia, we can save many of those people by using steroids at the right time. Second, so steroids work in these. Then second, we know that if a person is getting blood clots because of COVID, we can prevent that by using blood thinners. And about remdesivir, there is some evidence that it kills the virus and it may help in some patients to recover faster. But again, that is not a magic drug. So only steroids and blood thinner are proven that they are really helping patients to become serious. Other than that, there is no magic medicine in COVID. Whole world is doing research, at least 100 medicine, other research to see if you can give them early and they can protect the patient from becoming serious later. So that magic pill is still yet to arise.
We all look at pills as our remedy, but more than pills, it is supportive care. Why we are pushing somebody to a hospital is that the critical care, which is more important. Supporting at the right time, whether it's with oxygen, whether it is ventilatory support, that is much more important than, actual drugs as of now. But we'll definitely have some better cure in future.
The next question is continues with the remdesivir. As it's in shortage, Is there any substitute to it? And is it compulsory that for a severe COVID patient to be given a remdesivir injection? And it's also observed that many people, even after being given that injection, could not save their life. So what is your take on these questions, sir?
Dr. Preeti?
I think we have more or less answered that in our previous question. Just as Sir said, remdesivir, favipiravir, these are antivirals. The idea of giving an antiviral is that it kind of attacks the virus, reduces the viral burden. So whatever immune trigger that it does to our body and causes a pneumonia to progress doesn't happen. But in spite of antiviral, it may still happen because a good number, the immune responses are own. It's our body that is reacting differently, causing a pneumonia, and that is why we give steroids and other things to these patients. So remdesivir again is not a magic medication. But what we notice in the first wave, why doctors are recommending, why we push for giving this medication at the right time, is we really saw a benefit in terms of before July, after July, when we were managing the wave in our hospital, last wave, we realized that we were able to get patients better, faster, their fever responded, their oxygen needs became better, and their duration of symptoms and discharge from hospital was earlier after giving remdesivir. But whatever studies reported, there are a lot of mixed studies, but none of them have proven that remdesivir is a magic drug that is going to take care of your pneumonia and allow the pneumonia to resolve. So it is at best, you give it to somebody who absolutely will benefit from it. So who are the people who will benefit? Who will have fever ongoing into the second week, who may start developing oxygen deficiency, who has pneumonia on the CT scan. We give it and we know from our experience that they have recovered faster compared to people whom we were managing earlier. So that benefit we want to pass on to the patients. But right now we are struggling. There are no remdesivir available as freely. So don't panic. Yes, we are recommending because we want that benefit to be given to patients. But if it's not available, in spite of unavailability of remdesivir, we'll still be able to take care of our patients with steroids, blood thinners, and the supportive care. We would love to have remdesivir because our experience said that it may work better than what we are doing now. But again, it's no magic pill. So as you said, some patients have progressed even on remdesivir. So that's our body reacting differently. And a lot of times we have done everything that could be done and still we have not managed to, give a better outcome to the patient. So it's a fight, it's a war, and we do everything, we put everything in and hope for the best. So what is available is the best. If remdesivir is not available, don't panic. We'll still try our best to get the patients out from the illness.
I guess you're moving towards the last question, ma'am. So you doctors get a lot of exposed to COVID patients in your day-to-day affairs. And when you come back home, what is the care that you take after coming back home to save yourself from getting infected? And what the person wanted to ask, because he goes to office daily, and when he comes back, he wanted to know what you guys do so that he could adopt the same and keep him and his family safe.
So what has worked is definitely masking. Okay, I go by the rule that I will not remove my mask outside my house. Since we are working in hospitals, we know we are exposed to people who are going to cough in front of us, who may not wear the mask as effectively because of the illness itself. So based on that, we wear double masks. Like I wear an N95 with a surgical mask above it, but this is only for hospital setting. It's not needed that a community people start wearing N95 or people start wearing medical grade mask outside in the community. In the community, a good quality 3-ply cloth mask is just as enough, or a surgical mask is enough. But most important thing is be mindful of your surroundings. Be very mindful about what you are touching. I may be washing my hands at least 20-25 times in my hospital. I do try to wear gloves, but at times, even if we don't wear gloves, every patient contact ke baad, we wash our hand with soap and water. I don't remove my mask. That's a given, that no unmasking in public. That means I don't even drink water or eat food outside. I leave my house with my mask on. I come back and remove the mask, wash my hands and dispose of the clothes that I've worn, and wear different set of clothes at home. Beyond that, I don't do anything different. Last wave, I was very paranoid. I mean, just like every one of us. So I sent my family away. And of course, we were coming back and ensuring that we, wash our clothes with hot water, take a bath and all that thing. But now a lot of things are much clearer. So what is important is masking in public and frequent hand washing. Try to avoid enclosed spaces and communal eating, because a lot of people are asymptomatic. So you may just, acquire the infection by eating together, or you have your own bio bubble where the person whom you're interacting with is unlikely to be having that infection. So don't mingle too much with strangers, or don't go to crowded places, enclosed places, and mask and hand wash. That's the most important thing. And get yourself vaccinated as early as possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pillai ma'am. Thank you so much, sir. In spite of having I guess you guys just get half a day off during these COVID times, and even at those times you were serving us and helping us out with our queries. I've just now welcomed CA Yogesh Prasad, the past chairman of Thane branch, to offer the official vote of thanks.
Swapnil.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. Nowadays, there are many WhatsApp messages regarding this oxygen concentrator. If doctors can throw some light, whether it is really helpful, oxygen concentrator, because there is a shortage of oxygen and all.
Yeah, oxygen concentrator, basically what it does is extracts some oxygen from the atmosphere. It runs on electricity, and you can provide that oxygen through a tube and a mask to the patient. But oxygen concentrator cannot provide very high flow oxygen. Only oxygen supply is limited, and so certainly you cannot depend on an oxygen concentrator. You say that I have an oxygen concentrator. If I need oxygen, I will stay at home. That is not the right thing to do, because if you need more and more oxygen, if the pneumonia increases, that is not sufficient, and it is only a sort of a stopgap arrangement for a few hours, perhaps till you reach the hospital or something. But oxygen concentrator are very much in demand. We have purchased for our hospital also because of fear of oxygen shortages and etc. But I mean, you can't depend on an oxygen concentrator and say that I will stay at home and treat at home. If you need oxygen, you better be in hospital.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both the panelists. On a personal note, Dr. Bhave, whenever I've met you for the last 2 times, I was admitted in your hospital. So it's the first time I'm meeting you from home, and I'm really happy about it. And I'm in a healthy position. But thank you for all things you have done for us and the society at large. Yogesh Prasad, sir, if you could come over and provide with a vote of thanks, I'll be grateful.
It's really a wonderful session, doctor. Both the doctors, Dr. Preeti and Dr. Anand Bhave, the participants were glued to their particular, whatever media through which they were observing you, either on their mobiles or on their laptops. It was an excellent session. And really, the myth which is surrounding this particular understanding about this COVID things has been busted. Or rather, I can say it was a very planned efforts on the part of both of you, right from taking the care as to prevent getting COVID administration, what is to be done, and then thirdly, the vaccination. All the 3 aspects were lucidly and very efficiently explained by both of you. I would really, from the depth of my heart, would like to propose a vote of thanks. And your take-home messages, Dr. Preeti as well as Dr. Anand Bhave, the 3 things which you highlighted: wear a mask, maintain social distancing, and wash your hands frequently. I think we carry this message home, and we adopt this particular techniques in order to have an effective fight against this COVID. On my personal note, as what Swapnil had told, Dr. Anand Bhave has been my doctor for last so many years. And I have maintained my diabetic throughout this particular period of this 15-20 years on your guidance. And you were always having a motivational approach towards treating this particular aspect. Doctor, let me tell you that I have recovered a lot from 10 point.
Your voice is not clear, Yogesh bhai.
Yogesh, are you there with us?
I think some issue with Yogesh.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear this?
Yes.
See, now Dr. Anand Bhave was my personal doctor also for last nearly 15 years. And my HbA1c level has been effectively monitored and has been brought into control from 10 to now it is 6.1. Doctor, I would assure you that I would one day become non-diabetic following your guidance. the lucid way in which you have explained this entire concept. The three concepts of wearing a mask, maintaining social distancing, also washing your hands frequently is a very effective way to fight this COVID. And the systematic way in which the various myths surrounding this particular disease has been busted, really hats off to you. I think we all will not rely on the WhatsApp universities in the days to come, and we would definitely follow the advices which you have imparted. I am very much this particular recording of this particular thing will be communicated in our CA community, which will help them, those who could not attend this due to some reasons, to effectively deal with this particular myth and to effectively counter this particular thing. So on behalf of Thane branch, I would extend my heartfelt vote of thanks to both of you for coming over here and guiding us in this entire session. Similarly, Vasai branch and Kalyan branch, we are also very much enlightened, very much thankful to you, so that all the members, not only of Thane region, but Vasai would also attend this particular seminar and get a lot of insights into this particular aspect. So thank you once again from all of us. Thank you very much, sir. And madam.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Preeti ma'am and Anand sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Karandikar sir, now we can definitely call it end of the session. Karandikar sir.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Stay safe. God bless you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good evening. You.
Yes. Recovered well?
We recover हो गया.
चलो बढ़िया. चलो personally touch करता हूँ मैं.
Session was very good.
Yes sir.
चलो. Okay, everybody. Good night.
Okay. Take care.
Good night, sir.
Swapnil, nice handling. Swapnil and Prachi.
Yes, Prachi.
Hats up to you guys, यार. Nicely handled.
नहीं, thank you. सर ये YouTube पे इसका डाल दीजिए ना, बहुत अच्छा था ये सेशन.
नहीं, YouTube पे अपने पास अभी ये Zoom का लिंक जो Zoom से रिकॉर्ड हुआ है और Facebook में जो रिकॉर्ड हुआ है, I will pass it on to YouTube.
हाँ सर, बहुत अच्छा है. तो हम लोग कैसा है ना, इंस्टाग्राम में सब जगह फैला देंगे कि जो लोग अटेंड नहीं कर पाए हैं, they can have the link and